So it's now time to move for the round table. We have, welcome the speakers, and we also have someone who will join us, Olivier Colliot. Please go on. Who is Directeur de Recherche and co-director of the COG image team at the Brain and Spine Institute, and is also a project coordinator and co-founder of Clinica, software platform for clinical neuroimaging studies.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. So I get to ask the first question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe the first one will be for Gaël. So I get your point on reusability, which amounts to making libraries versus giving frozen codes. But do we really need to oppose the two? Because I'm not sure that building libraries is, let's say, something feasible for any neuroscientist who might nevertheless do code in relation to a specific paper, and it might be, there might still be some value in just giving the scripts for the paper. So do we need to oppose the two?
I don't actually really think that we need to oppose the two, first thing. Though it's important not to stop at reproducibility, because people, I've seen this quite often, will just say, here's my bunch of data file and script, and I've done my job, which is not the case. And so I didn't have time to go in this detail, but I really think there's a gradient. I have what I call the ladder of code quality, and you can find it on some of my slides, where basically I don't think every code, something that's quite important is I don't think every code should end up in a library. There's cost in putting a code in library, in curating it, but as we go, we learn to do better code, and we learn to improve our code, and we also learn when to stop. So packaging code, premature optimization is not useful, but stopping too early is not good. If you publish a paper, you should have code that is understandable. If you publish a paper with code that is not understandable, I would like this to be something not acceptable by the community.
And then maybe a follow-up question is, then how do you enforce the fact that papers are published with understandable code, not only with code?
That's a very good question. It's a very hard question. I don't think that every paper of my lab is understandable, let alone reproducible. Actually, to be very precise, I think we do have papers that are not reproducible, that haven't reproduced. We've gotten better across time, much better. And the two things that kind of helped us was first libraries. Really importantly, and the reason libraries help, we're making this point in a paper on reproducibility with Russ Poldrak and Chris Filo-Gorgolewski. The reason libraries help is that they allow you to manipulate less code. The scripts that underline our publications have gotten significantly smaller because we've started having much better libraries. That's the first thing that helped. The other is lab culture, and I think that's also very stimulating for the young people in the lab. There are none here, I believe, so they can't tell whether I'm right or wrong. But there's knowledge in the lab. That knowledge is shared between everybody, including young people, postdocs, even interns. We do coding sprints together, and we're pulling ourselves by our shoelaces. We're really improving ourselves by doing this, and I think it overall generates a warm, fuzzy feeling in the lab, and this is like a win-win loop.
I also wanted to ask a question about especially reproducibility in general, because I read in this article that I really like from May 2016 that reproducibility is like brushing your teeth, actually. Once you learn that, it's something that might take time to learn, but it's good for you on the long run, actually. So I would like to have your comments also on this particular subject.
I hadn't heard that, but I think it's a very interesting analogy, and it takes time to do things, and it's when I do training, I tell students this is a process. You're not going to start tomorrow, right? Things improve and change over time. It's a process, and I try to do my work in a way that's reproducible. And it does take time, and I know that when I don't, because I'm rushed, because there's some deadline, I always regret it afterwards, because I have to go through and clean my files, and I never want to do that. So yeah, in that sense, I think it is analogous to toothbrushing.
I call it cleaning your room, clean your bedroom. My desk is an awful mess. And I think something that's quite important to say is not everything will be reproduced, is reproducible. There's a cost to reproducing certain things, and one of the biggest hurdles, for instance, is storage space. Our file server, which is 100 terabytes, just crashed a few weeks ago, and we're still in the recovery process. And what we do is nothing. The CERN, for instance, is now unable to store temporary files as they get the data. So the original data is not even stored; it's dumped. It's processed, reduced, and dumped. So the data processing isn't reproducible. And anyhow, at the end of the day, if we wanted to really reproduce the experiment, we would have to rerun the experiment. So I think it's fine to accept that not everything will be reproduced. And I like the analogy of brushing your teeth, because it's about the simple things that matter. We should be doing those simple things, and we should be conscious when we don't do something that we've accepted not to do it because there was a real cost to it.
Yeah, maybe so it's like cleaning the bedroom. Okay, if it's like cleaning the bedroom, well, I cannot get my son to clean his bedroom, but so maybe the more general question for both of you is, how do we get the system to give incentives for that? Because my basic question is, I tell PhD students that doing all this is good for them, it's good for science in general. But if I have to be honest, I have to acknowledge the fact that at the current state, it might not be always the optimal choice for their career. It's very sad, but I think it's a bit true. Because committees are not really already sufficiently aware of these issues. So how do we make to change that, to create the incentives for people to do it? Not only because out of ethical behavior, but also because they have something to win. And what do you think?
Yeah, so in my own research group, I make it a non-negotiable thing that we work in a certain way, and then I can make my students do certain things, but also I have the time to train them, so I think that's important. In terms of the external incentives, we'll have to have recognition for putting out code, for putting out data, which is not necessarily there, but I'm mildly optimistic that the culture is shifting around what is acknowledged and recognized, I think. But I don't know if that's a prevalent view.
Well, I think you in the UK have done a pretty good job with this and with things like the Software Sustainability Institute. But I would challenge the statement that it's not beneficial, and I will tell you why I think it's beneficial. It's in a very subtle and indirect way. A group of authors have a reputation, especially API, a group has a reputation. Authors that have a reputation to deliver things that reproduce well, that are solid, that are easy to reuse, including data, get more seen. You know how science works. We read a paper because we know the author is on the list. It's a sad thing, but it's the case. And so, as you know, in the long game, there is an incentive to create high quality science, which goes with reproducibility. Now, the question is having this, the students are going to be with you for a short amount of time, unfortunately, play for the long game. And I think the way it goes is a question of leadership. You know, if you tell your student clean your room, your son clean your room, and you don't clean your own room, and by the way, my room is an utter mess, but that won't work. So it's about working together as a team, and I strongly do believe that in the long run, high quality work is recognized and will just, you know, push further.
If I can challenge that a little bit, I totally agree with you that there is an incentive in the long run. Labs that produce good things are recognized, but it may not hold at the level of at the time frame of moving from PhD student to a permanent position. Because the time frame is maybe not long enough so that you're in front of a commission, nobody knows you, whatever you've done, in many cases. So I think we still need to work on the system and to change the mentality in the recruitment process and to get also these short-term incentives. Yeah. So.
Thank you. So maybe if there are questions also in the audience. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much. I just have a question about how do you give some feedback on the code? How do you know when your room is like clean enough? You have like something, we've seen pub peers this morning. You have something like Git peer, or so we can have some peer reviewed about code.
That's an excellent question. So in modern open source development, code review is the basis of everything. The way modern open source development works is nobody pushes their code directly to the repository. Everybody pushes their code with what's known as a pull request. The pull request gets reviewed, and there are tools to do this. GitHub is an example where it's just awesome. You can annotate, and there's a discussion process, and then the code gets merged. Now, doing this for a research paper is impractical, maybe impossible. However, you find that at some point it's really useful to read other people's code. I read a bit my students' code. Of course, I can't read all their code. Well, maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe we publish too much in my lab. I'm not saying this is a good thing. I'm saying this is a bad thing. Publishing too much is a horrible thing. But when our goal, one thing that I found that works really well is that when we have some research that we're proud of, we try to put the code out. The minute you put the code out, you've got some form of a shame factor, which means that you don't want to put horrible code out. And then immediately you start reading each other's code. Like at least the most responsible authors on the paper start reading the code. And interesting things happen.
Other questions from the audience?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I have a question and comment more like about indeed the incentive for the students and how it's a pain for making tidy the room, etc., and how it's valuable later on for academia. And maybe my comment is more like the vast majority of students won't be in academia, and actually it's maybe a good training to write proper code if they want to have a real life application of their PhD and their education. And my question is thus, how we combine those two constraints of academic productivity at the paper outcome and the real life situation of basically writing good code is more valued by society than writing a good paper with stories and etc.
So I think in talking to students, and I'm not familiar with the French doctoral system, but in talking to students in the UK, there is a disconnect between the PhD as training and the PhD as a paper production machine. And so I'm very explicit with students in the training that we do that your PhD is training. If papers come, that's great. But that's not the goal. The goal is to get you training, and the training will get you to a career in industry, for example. Evolutionary anthropology won't get you to a career in industry. The other skills that you learn, those might get you a career in industry. And so I actually, I'm very explicit about this when I interview prospective students to make them understand that this is what it's about. I appreciate it's not a prevailing narrative. And just one point that, and I don't know the data here, and I don't know if there is data, and I'd be curious to hear this, but I agree that the narrative that we all grew up in is this idea that you need to publish a lot because this is what is valued. But certainly my subjective and anecdotal experience, having sat on a number of panels now at different levels, is that things are different because reputation, you know, your advisor being able to write you a strong reference, this person always works to the best of their ability. I think that counts. So we hear these horror stories of people counting citations and looking at impact factors, but I don't know if we actually have experiences. It's not my experience, but I don't know what the data actually say to this. If there are sort of data that have analysed this, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. In my experience, I would say there has been some progress. So in partly I would agree with you that going back to the question, I still think we need to modify a bit the way we evaluate recruitment, to put probably less emphasis on pure productivity, of pure paper productivity, and to have a good balance so that good practice can be rewarded in any case. I think there is still work to do.
What I tell young people is that if you're a genius, you don't need to code. If you're not a genius, by genius I mean an absolute genius. If you're not a genius, if you're just clever, you'll need to code. And coding skills will get you further. If I get an application, I look at the person's code if it's online. If a person has code online, it's a good thing. It just makes me happier. By the way, I'm always hiring, so please send me. And if I can tell a personal story, I did a PhD in physics, in experimental quantum physics, and I moved after one postdoc to computer science for neuroscience. And the only reason why I was able to do this move and the only reason why I was able to get it through after was because I knew how to code. It was my superpower. It was how I survived. And I just think it's an enabler. And once again, if you're a genius, you don't need it. If you're just Joe average like me, you need it.
So is there one last question before we move?
Yes. There's one curse word that nobody pronounced today. It's pre-registration. This idea has been around for quite a few years, and everybody agrees that it's a great idea, but somehow very few do it. I was wondering whether you have any comment on that. Yeah, go ahead.
I wouldn't know the numbers. I do know that in some fields like psychology, pre-registration is becoming the norm. And one word that I haven't heard which relates to pre-registration is register reports, which I think leverage the strengths of pre-registration with the strengths of the peer review process. I don't know if people are familiar with this format. It's a format that a number of journals are offering now and increasing. It's where you submit a paper before you've actually done the research, which means that you get the peer review and possibly an in-principle acceptance by the journal when it's useful, when you can actually implement the advice and feedback from the reviewers, and then you can do your research. So it combines the pre-registration and it also has a number of other advantages. So I think that's probably field-dependent how prevalent these practices are, but they're coming.
I just want to echo the fact that, at least in psychology, registered reports are going up very, very fast, and that's very good news.
Thank you very much again to the speakers. Thank you for the audience. We are going to move to the next session. Thank you.